The subject for tonight's trialogue is the subject near and dear to my heart. You might even say it has my initials on it. I had decided to talk about time, and then there was a request to do so that must be the general drift of our interest and intent as far as what I can contribute. I'm very interested in time. I'm very interested in the largest frames into which phenomena can be fitted, and sort of the various ways in which we view our humanness if we change the way we look at time. And I think that it's sufficiently unsecured by science that we need feel no trepidation about doing this. What I mean by that is examine or recall to yourself for a moment what it is that orthodoxy teaches about time. It teaches that for reasons impossible to conceive, the universe sprang from utter nothingness in a single moment. Now, whatever you might think about that idea, notice that it is the limit test for credulity. In other words, if you believe that, you could believe anything. It's impossible to conceive of something more unlikely. Yet this is where science begins its supposed rational tale of the unfolding of the phenomenal universe. It's almost as if science is saying, give us one free miracle, and from there, the entire thing will proceed with a seamless causal explanation. But there is an aspect to the phenomenal universe that I think impinges on anyone who undertakes to examine it, that is not given any weight whatsoever by science. And that is that when we look at the span of time which stretches from the Big Bang to the present moment, it's very clear, I think, that complexity has aggregated towards the nether end of this process in the dimensions in which we find ourselves. And for example, the early universe was very hot, and only a kind of electron plasma could exist. Hence, there was no atomic physics, no molecular chemistry, only the physics of plasma. By cooling, complexity appears. This is not argued. But what interests me is that each successive advance into complexity occurred much faster than the stage which preceded it. So the first billion years of the life of the universe was an extraordinarily boring and empty period. Basically, atomic systems were forming, the simplest elements were aggregating into stars. This permitted fusion, the cooking out of heavier elements, and after some long period of time, carbon appeared. And of course, 4-valent carbon then permits a whole new set of properties to emerge, including ultimately life. And I'm moving through this very quickly because what I want to concentrate on is what I call the short epoch. And my terminology here is largely drawn from Alfred North Whitehead, I think is the great unsung hero of British 20th century philosophy. And he had a notion of a progression of epochs and leading toward what he called concrescence. And I've taken this notion of concrescence and attempted to construct a temporal cosmology that literally stands on its head the explanation of science. because I don't believe the universe is pushed outward into substantial existence by the primal explosion. I believe the universe is being pulled and shaped into an ever more complexified and concrescent entity that is in fact a transcendental attractor. Transcendental in the sense of residing in a higher dimension than ordinary space, and transcendental in the feeling tone sense in which we ordinarily use that. Now, this idea is basically just Catholicism with the chrome stripped off, unless, or, Teilhard de Chardin-ism of a certain sort, the idea of the omega point, the idea of a telos attracting and drawing history into itself. But what I'm interested to consider is that most delicate of all questions in prophetic systems of this sort, and that is when. When? Science evades this issue by setting us down somewhere between the Big Bang and the heat death of the universe, imagined millions of years in the future. Science, notice, also completely marginalizes human experience. We are told that we live on a typical planet around a typical star at the edge of a typical galaxy, and that we are animals of a complex type but easily identified to more typical forms. My notion is to take seriously the apparent vectoring in of universal intent on the human world, and keeping away from the pitfalls of religion, to try and talk about why that might be happening. And I think it might be happening for the following reason: that history is actually the shockwave of eschatology, and that this is a concept that we have not sufficiently entertained, but which we are going to be forced to entertain as the planetary crisis created by modernity builds towards some kind of climax. What I mean by that history is the shockwave of eschatology is something like this. If this planet were a planet of hummingbirds, woodchucks, giraffes, and grasslands, then Darwinian mechanics as modified by molecular biology would be sufficient to explain what's going on. The fly in the ointment of that simple schema is ourselves. We represent some other order of existence. We, this afternoon, talked about language. My notion is that out of the broad moving stream of animal evolution, a species was selected, fell victim to. The terminology can vary, but a higher animal fell under the influence of an attractor pulling us in the direction of symbolic activity. And this is what we have been involved in through theater, dance, poetry, chant, magic, religion, science, politics, cognitive and symbolic activity. And it's only occupied for all practical purposes outside the dreary world of chipping flint and picking fleas less than 25,000 years. It's a blink of an eye on the cosmic scale. It is the shockwave which precedes eschatology. An analogy would be, think of the undisturbed surface of a pond. If the pond begins to boil, it indicates that some enormous protean form is moving beneath the surface and is about to, in fact, make its presence visible. This is what history is on the surface of nature. It's a boiling anticipation of the emergence of the contrascent, or the transcendental objects at the end of time. And it has been anathema to discuss this in secular society, even New Age secularism, because this has always been the province of beastly priests and their hideously hierarchical and constipated religions, so that decent people have tended to turn away from it. But in fact, this is some kind of primary intuition about our circumstance. And the reason it's important is because we now are in a situation of planetary crisis, where you don't have to be an enthusiast for Whiteheadian metaphysics or psilocybin or the more arcane metaphors of Terence McKenna to realize that we are approaching our limits. It's inconceivable to speak of 500 years in the human future. History is a self-consuming process, and all we need to do at this point is extrapolate any of a number of curves. Here are some of my favorites. The spread of epidemic sexually transmitted diseases, the proliferation of thermonuclear weapons, the dissolution of the atmospheric ozone, the rise in world population. When these curves are extrapolated, it's very clear that we have taken business as usual off the menu. And I would prefer, rather than imagine that this is a situation driven by the momentum of bad historical decisions, and therefore our responsibility, the wrecking of the planet and so forth, I would rather prefer to believe that what we're witnessing is something like a birth, and that it is built into the laws of physics, what we're witnessing. That we are literally on a collision course with an object that we cannot exactly discern. It lies below the event horizon of rational apprehendability at this point, but the east is streaked with the blush of rosy dawn, for sure. And what it portends, I think, is an end to our fall, an end to our sojourn in matter, and an end to our separateness. And it lies now so close to us in historical time by virtue of our having collapsed our options in three-dimensional space, that you need only close your eyes, have a dream, take a shamanic hallucinogen, you practice yoga, and there you will see it. It's an attractor which has been working on the species at least 1 million years, and I maintain that this is actually somehow a universal attractor, and we represent a concrescence of complexity that is truly transcendental. You know, James Joyce said, if you want to be phoenixed, you've got to be parked. Up in the Yent prospector, you sprout all your work and whoop your wings. He said the end is nearer than you might wish to be congealed. And I'm essentially carrying this same notion, because I think that otherwise we're going to be victimized by an enormous pessimism arising out of the bankruptcy of science, positivism, ordinary politics, so forth and so on. The ride to the end of history is going to be a white-knuckle experience. And I offer this metaphor in the hopes that it may make the trip to the transcendental object glittering at the end of time an easier ride. Gentlemen. Well, let me fill in the footnotes. It refers to the last things, the final things, the eschaton. The eschaton is a kind of neutral way of saying what some people call the Buddha Maitreya, what some people call the flying saucer at the end of history, the second coming. It's the last thing, the eschaton, and I see it as a kind of, what I think is happening is that all boundaries are dissolving, and the boundaries between men and women, between society and nature, and ultimately the boundaries between life and death. And we are going truly beyond ambiguity, beyond syntax. We have been trapped in a kind of demonic simulacrum for 25,000 years, created out of language. And now, somehow, this accelerating process of involuted connectedness that characterizes this Whiteheadian progression of epochs toward the concrescence is in fact being fulfilled. Well, because the planet can't bring forth further societies. We've come to the end of our road in Newtonian space. And that's what I wanted to say. I mean, wouldn't you agree, Ralph, that when we look back over the whole history of life as known to us, what it appears to be is some kind of strategy for the conquest of dimensionality. In other words, the earliest forms of life were fixed slimes of some sort, and then you get very early motility, but no sense organs. The being literally feels its way from one point of perception to another. Then you get sequestering of light-sensitive pigment on the cell, and the notion of a gradient of here and there appears. And then for a long, long time, it's the coordination of, backbones, skeletons, binocular vision, so forth and so on. Then with us, some fundamental boundary is crossed, because we are beginning apparently the conquest of terrestrial space ended with the cheetah or something. But in us, what begins is the conquest of time, first through memory and strategic triangulation of data out of memory, and then with the invention of epigenetic coding, writing electronic databases, and ever more deep and thorough spreading out into time. And so this eschatonic transition that I'm talking about, essentially all that's happening is that the deployed world of three-dimensional space shrinks to the point where all points are cotangent, and it literally goes into hyperspace. It's no longer a metaphorical hyperspace. And so what we're saying here is, you're right, it's no big deal, and yet what it actually will come to be seen to be is a transition from one dimension of existence to another. But a continuation of this universal program of self-expansion and transcendence that can be traced back to the earliest and most primitive kind of protoplasm.
Isn't this a fancy way of saying we're running out of time?
Yes, time is speeding up. There isn't much left. Someone said time is God's way of keeping everything from happening all at once. Well, my notion is that we are caught, think of the transcendental attractor as a kind of black hole into which we have fallen into its basin of attraction, and now we're circling ever faster, ever deeper as we approximate and approach to this singularity. The eschaton is simply a singularity. It exceeds rational apprehendability. Somehow, intrinsically, in principle, it lies outside the framework of possible description. We're on a collision course with, the unspeakable. And that explains why we are not groveling around like groundhogs and other animals. We have been selected out for this very, very peculiar metamorphosis via information and the conquest of dimensions to become something completely other, a new ontological order of being, as we represent now a new ontological order of being when contrasted to animal life. Now we're apparently about to take one more step.
Well, I've thought a lot about it. It's a difficult question. If we extend the search for a universal crisis beyond the Earth, the only evidence that has been offered by anybody is there is some kind of problem between nuclear theory, which has been very well established for 40 years, and the neutrino output of the sun. And in trying to account for this, your choice is either that nuclear theory requires serious modification, which doesn't seem likely since it's worked in all of the cases up till now, or there is in fact something wrong with our star. Searching for pathology beyond the solar system in the cosmic environment is outside the present reach of our technical ability. I tend to think, though the timeline that I've elaborated can be extended back into the pre-biological domain, I tend to think that this is a phenomenon of biology that I'm talking about, and that it is just one small planet, and that biology is the process of conquering dimensions, which once it starts, as a primal slime, it accelerates and it bootstraps itself to higher and higher levels at tighter and tighter turns of the spiral, and that we are now in the process of seeing it essentially exhaust and abandon the planet and carry itself into this other dimension. So it's a phenomenon of biology. That's why all these metaphors of Gaia and Gaian interaction seeming cogent to me.
The whole point about biology is that the earliest forms of life-sending plants are related to the light of the sun. And the whole of biology, the whole of the plant kingdom, the whole of the transformation of the atmosphere of the planet is dependent not on merely terrestrial events, but on our relation to the sun, on the wider cosmic environment. Since the elements of carbon are so introduced dust-based supernovae of exploding stars. So biology on Earth is used in a much larger ecology. And so first of all, I don't think the issues like on Earth can be regarded as merely terrestrial or merely biological in that sense. And secondly, every human culture that talked about some light pulling it ahead, some vision that's strong, has tended to talk in terms of images of celestial influences of one kind or another. Sky, planets, stars, heavenly influences of one sort or another, which suggests to me that if we're to take them literally, and you take most of these things quite literally, really, that we have to look for influences from outside the Earth working on us. The transcendental object may be located or channeled through the sun, other stars, planets, constellations, something to do with the astronomical environment.
Well, if it is truly a higher dimensional object, then it is, in some sense, everywhere in this universe. And so all routes of evolutionary progress may lead into this. it's a kind of universal whole-jam, like time and space, into which we enter into some kind of, I suppose, galactic community of intelligence or something. In other words, biology, if I understand what you were implying in the early part of your statement, I agree, yes, that spores or viruses or bacterium probably percolate and permeate through the physical universe. And wherever they come upon a planetary environment in which they can work their magic, then life takes hold, and from then on, it's a battle in which life attempts to modify the abiotic environment and control it and keep it at equilibrium sufficiently for the program of bios to be put into place. And that program is to go from this initial seed to a return to the higher hidden source of all outside the pleroma of three-dimensional space. It's a kind of Gnostic return idea. It's an idea of alchemical sublimation and rarefaction. I see the cosmos as a distillery for novelty, and the transcendental object is the novelty of novelties. And when we formally define that, we discover we are getting something like a Leibnizian plenum, a monad of some sort, a tiny thing which has everything enfolded within it. And that means that you're in another dimension where all points in this universe have been collapsed into cotangency. And it is an apotheosis. It is an apokatastasis. Something else in Greek, I'm not sure what.
Pure poetry. While trying to listen to this, did I not observe a consensus that, as a matter of fact, it's provincial? Is that right?
That I'm suggesting
biological catastrophe on planet Earth. Well, the rest,
yes, the Earth is giving birth to a hyperdimensional being.
In spite of the fact that the eschaton permeates as a higher dimensional object the entire universe. As a matter of fact, it's got a special sub-eschaton with a more accelerated program just for us.
Salvation proceeds on many schedules, my son. The fact that the galaxy is spiral suggests to me that in the interest of modesty, we should probably confine this supposition to the notion that it's happening within the galaxy. It's perhaps what spiral galaxies are about.
Well, the sun is burning out. People believe that. A mere 500 million years to go.
Well,
a little bit longer than the 18.5 years, but...
Well, but excuse me, if there is a problem with the neutrino output of the sun, the orthodox interpretation of that is that means the sun has stopped and gone off the fusion boil, and is in fact just sitting there, and the amount of time it would take for evidence of this having gone off the boil to percolate to the surface is about 25,000 years. And the moment that it happens, 8 minutes later, the radiant energy reaching the Earth will drop 60%. Well, no, it's very interesting. Did you know that immediately preceding, by immediately preceding, I mean in the million years preceding the impact that killed the dinosaurs, some enormous extinction was underway, that they can't figure it out. It's like the Earth knew, or something like that. There was an extinction underway when that cometary impact hit. And so what I'm suggesting, Ralph, is that biology knows. This is back to this morning's discussion about the homing pigeon. Biology has
a complete four-dimensional,
I-
five-dimensional
biology-
math of the planet's history.
What the hell? The comet's on the way. Let's get it on.
The planet said, the comet's on the way. Let's get these monkeys moving toward the production of sufficient complexity that when this impact event occurs, it will have a transcendental rather than simply
An opportunity to escape into another dimension.
Yeah. So all of history is this curious relationship with this intuition that nobody wants to face, but nobody can quite get rid of, and so here we're sacrificing ghosts, and we're doing this, and we're doing that, because we have this very restless feeling that all is not well in three-dimensional space and time, and, history keeps bearing it out, and now it's upon us. Who don't quite make the extinction of the moment.
Well, the instruction...
Well, here's the idea. Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentine surrealist, he had an interesting idea. He felt that a species could not enter hyperspace, whatever that means, until the last member of that species perished. And so what is happening here is that vast numbers of souls are accumulating in some dimension, waiting for us to decently depart this mortal coil so that the human family in a body can find itself at play in the fields of the Lord.
After all.
All along. Yes. But what I want to do, Terence, to think this through a bit further. Given that there's this, we used to think that this great transformation of humanity, a kind of collective near-death experience, except it would be an actual death experience, would be brought about by a nuclear cataclysm. Well, although the bombs are still there, that model's gone out of fashion for some reason. I mean, it could easily come back.
But currently,
we're now more into ecological. Your list, apart from nuclear proliferation, had the ecological apocalypses. Anyway, we've got all these models. Let's assume that it happens, that this happens, that this sudden transformation of humanity and dogs and cats and everything else into this they're taken up into the transcendental attractor. Now, what effect does this have on the rest of the universe? That's my question. Leave aside the details on that.
Well, I think it's not an answerable question, but it is in fact what we will then set out to understand. That we are literally packing up and preparing to decamp from Newtonian space and time for the high road of hyper-dimensional existence. And we may find ourselves, the least in the grand councils of the who knows what, or we may find something, I imagine, entirely unsuspected. In fairness to the audience, I should say, these things don't spring de novo for me. I talked this morning about shamanism anticipating the future, and that was how that magic was worked. Well, if you pursue these psychedelic shamanic plants, there is inevitably this conclusion scenario or this apocalyptic intuition, and I think that shamans have always seen the end, that the human enterprise in three-dimensional space has always been finite. And in the same way that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny as we look back into the past, it seems reasonable then to assume that death, which we have spent 1,000 years turning into a materialist vacuum, is in fact not that at all. And that there is an enormous mystery that hovers over our existence, and that it is only unraveled beyond the grave.
And I would never in my life have thought that I would have been pushed to this kind of a position. I mean, I spent the first half of my life getting away from this, but the evidence of these shamanic hallucinogens is in fact that shamans have always done what they do via ancestor magic and higher dimensional perception, and that death is not what naive positivism in the last 500 years has attempted to say that it is. And I realize that it's incredible to suppose that here at the apex of materialist, positivist, scientific civilization, we're going to make an orthogonal turn into an understanding of what lies beyond the grave. But in fact, I think this is probably the paradigm-shattering, world-condensing event that is bearing down on us.
Conversion in progress.
All right. Well, given all that, I want to know whether this has happened somewhere else, because if it could happen on our planet, change the entire conditions of dimensionality throughout the galaxy, or let us perhaps the cosmos, what makes you think that our planets be cursed?
No, I don't think that.
Well, if it's happened elsewhere, what effects will it have elsewhere in the galaxy, on planets elsewhere in the galaxy? What effects do you expect it to have had on us already?
Well, it seems to be the content of it when you explore it, when you explore the adumbrations of the transcendental object, and you see all this transhuman alien data. That is essentially what it has become in its past history. It wears upon itself the imprint of, because see, all life is finding its way back to some kind of source that is in a higher plane. And that's why it has this alien presentation, because it has maybe 1,000 civilizations poured into it, or 10,000, or 50 million. Who can know? The universe is old already. But it is, it pervades the universe like a gas in a higher dimensional space.
What I can't work out then is whether we're talking here about some planetary virus that gets hold of civilization after civilization, or planet after planet, and causes them to auto-destruct in a particular way. Or whether we're talking about some cosmic prisoners, because whatever it is, it seems to be pretty local to planets.
It seems to me it's just a continuation of life's program of conquering whatever dimension it's up against that it has not yet conquered. And probably that process is endless. That's what life is. It's a chemical strategy for the conquest of dimensionality. And it carries out this program come hell or high water.
Just like striking a match, biology comes to a planet, and then their flame leaps up, and then pretty soon it burns out through the exhaustion of resources and the arrival of the shockwave of the eschaton for that particular planet. Biology there is extinguished once again.
And what is left in the ashes is the alchemical lapis, the Sophic hydrolith, the one thing. Right? Yes, well, I wouldn't expect you to buy into it whole hog, but it's interesting because it provides a way of imaging what is happening that doesn't fall to some of the dualisms that haunt either a reductionist view or an out-and-out, gung-ho, no questions asked religious conversion view. And let me say one more thing while we're on this subject, because it shouldn't be left unsaid. There are orthodox cosmologies that support my contention of the possibility of a universal collapse. Hans Alfvén of the Swedish Academy of Sciences has suggested that the universe is what's called a vacuum fluctuation,
Now, a vacuum fluctuation is a situation where it happens in quantum mechanics, where a group of particles and antiparticles spring into existence and then annihilate each other. And because parity is conserved, this creation ex nihilo of matter is allowed by quantum physics. But an interesting aspect of these vacuum fluctuations is that quantum theory sets no upper limit on their theoretical size. It merely says that the larger they are, the more improbable they are. Well, the universe itself could be a vacuum fluctuation of some 10 high 68 particles which sprang into being completely according and allowed by quantum physics, separated into higher dimensional space, and are in fact eventually at some point in the future going to reconnect and conserve parity. And Alfvén says that in this kind of a higher dimensional collision, all points in both systems would appear to an observer to become cotangent instantly. And what that would mean is, he's saying that the material universe potentially could disappear in a single moment across megaparsecs of space and time, and all that would be left, Alfvén says then, is light. Because light does not have an antiparticle. It is different. It is the exception. And no one knows what the physics of light, a universe made only of light, would be like. And I suggest to you that the many myths and intuitions that link light to the process of spiritual advancement and talk about the generation of the light body and so forth, may anticipate something like this. So even within the toolbox of ordinary quantum astrophysics, there are ways of tinker-toying the syntactical bits together to produce incredibly optimistic, transcendental, and psychedelic scenarios.
There's no way to personally leap into the dimensions of hyperspace in the birth event of the eschaton, not in quantum physics, I suppose. We're talking about a different kind of thing. What about the timetable, Terence? So far it seems like your idea is pretty similar to Teilhard de Chardin, and except you said he didn't give us a timetable. So assuming we have sunshine for 25,000 years,
when do I think it will occur?
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of weird to talk about that because it rests on a formal argument where you have to look at a lot of historical data. What I did was I produced curves that I felt were reflective of the ebb and flow of novelty in time. Then by fitting these curves to historical data, and granted, history is not a quantified entity, but nevertheless, there are certain there's general agreement, for example, that the Greek Renaissance was a novel time, the 20th century was a novel time. So by doing this, I slowly refined down a prediction based on a spiral closure, which makes it happen much faster than you would expect, of the winter solstice of 2012 AD. After I had made that calculation, I discovered to my amazement that the Mayan civilization had a very complex cyclical and recursive calendar, and it too indicated that same date. I think if you take these World Bank, United Nations strict, objective data curves and put in the fudge factor of the unexpected, it seems pretty reasonable to suppose that at least there is a nexus of prophetistic intensity of some sort that has caused a number of traditions for some reason to get focused on the late months of 2012 AD. When I attempted to understand objectively what could be going on there, using computer simulations of the star fields, a program called Voyager that lets you see any place in the solar system 10,000 years in the past or 10,000 years in the future. It turns out that there is something unique about this December 21st, 2012 solstice. It's a solstice which will occur at the heliacal rising of the galaxy. What that means is once every 26,000 years in the precession of the great year, there will be a winter solstice sunrise that catches 28 degrees Sagittarius on the plane of the galactic ecliptic. What does that mean? Who knows? Certainly not me. In Hamlet's Mill by Giorgio de Santillana and Helga von Dechen, who were both very well-respected historians of science, they suggested that for ancient peoples, these were somehow galactic gates or way stations of some sort through which souls had to transit to make their way back to their higher and hidden home. This is not compelling stuff to me. I find it a little too mediumistic or something, but nevertheless it is an objective fact that the heliacal rising of the galaxy, which occurs once in 26,000 years, will occur on this date I chose, and that I did not know that at the time, nor did I know.
Well, that's interesting, I agree, but let's look at this. We have here the coincidence of three different things. One is what you did looking at historical data, which I think we could fairly describe as novel and very interesting and fancy kind of mathematical extrapolation of historical data that does sort of culminate in a point. We grant you that. The other two things, the Mayan calendar and the greatest astronomical conjunction in 26,000 years, these are both periodic phenomena. The Mayan calendar repeats the cycle in 26,000 years, and the greatest conjunction in the galaxy, from our perspective in the galaxy, recurs every 26,000 years. So they could be expected to recur once more before the sun gives its last gasp and biology must extinct. So if we would weigh these things equally, it would kind of suggest that your mathematical extrapolation, which is good, I like it, but it's not the same as the reportage of a shamanic clairvoyance that you were talking about, of a hyperdimensional investigation. This is more like academic scholarship with huge database of history and this imaginative curve used to extrapolate data. So this suggests that your extrapolation curve could actually be reversed, like you take it like this, it ends here, you take it out and you rotate it around and you put it back there. And then you have a completely different model which must necessarily, without a doubt, equally well or poorly fit the historical data up to now, and yet it has a future, but only for 26,000 more years. In spite of this, that it's not a shamanic reportage, it's not an ironclad extrapolation, and it's not a coincidence with two other disparate eschatological predictions, then I think the case for this actually being the omega point is weak. You should think about this. It's an important day. It's some kind of transformation. As far as the transition from all of us into the fifth or eighth dimension, I don't see a case for it.
Well, you'd have to look at it, because what it comes down to then is a very fine-tuned argument, looking at a particular curve, looking at historical...
Look at the curve, reflect it around, and put it on the other side. What's to contradict this? History sort of starts running backwards from the point.
Well, I'm not sure if I can explain, but there is an answer, and I'll try. It's something like this. It's a damped oscillation. It actually does run down. It isn't elegant to try to make it one cycle within a larger or extrapolated set of larger cycles, because it has a built-in spin-down factor in it that makes it pretty clear that it is a single, it's many cycles embedded within many other cycles, but on its highest level, it actually has a beginning and it actually has an end.
It just seems to you, looking at this, radically implausible that there would be any future after this point.
Well, I've thought of many, many ways of thinking about this that would make it not so catastrophically radical. And here's a very simple way that makes everybody feel a little better. Suppose that what happens on December 21st, 2012, is physicists who have been laboring for some time toward the technology of time travel actually succeed. Well, then suddenly the wave is fulfilled, and yet the heavens do not fall, and angels don't appear to lift us into paradise. It simply shows that the reason history ended at that date was because after the invention of time travel, the notion of a seriality of events ceases to have any meaning, and so everybody agrees, well, history ended yesterday, and it did end, and we now live in the post-historical atemporal bubble where you not only tell where you live, but when you live. And everything would be very nicely fulfilled then, and people would say, well, the people who saw it coming got highly agitated because they didn't realize what it was that was coming. Now we know what was coming. It turns out to be just like the invention of the steam engine or powered flight or anything else. We needn't assume these cosmic dimensions to the transformation.
You've given
but
this
we
up,
must
or
assume the transformation.
There are still some alternatives?
Oh, there are other alternatives. Here's a good one. How about this one? December 21st, 2012 AD, I drop dead. Then everyone says, well, how peculiar. It was only about him.
That's really
It was just we were all swept along for 45 years in some bizarre mathematical hallucination that this very glib Irishman was able to foist on, and it's totally fulfilled, and yet again the heavens don't fall nor the oceans boil. So, but I'm telling you, Ralph, there's something out there.
There's something
out there. And I'll know it when I see it. And I expect you at my elbow. Well, I'm sort of a bad person to try this all out, and I'm kind of an unfortunate bearer of this message, because if you knew me, you would know that I'm actually not a very pleasant or nice person, and I'm very hard on, there's nothing, believe it or not, I hate unanchored speculation. And yet I find myself in the position of leading the charge in the greatest unanchored speculation in the history of crackpot thinking. So it bothers me. See, my method, which I can't really go into tonight, but it's very formal. What I say is, it's very easy to predict the future, because who the hell can say you're wrong, you know? It's just fire-free zone. Predicting the past, on the other hand, is very, very difficult because it's happened. So if you're wrong, everyone will know. So what I have done is make a career out of predicting the past with a wave which proceeds right past the present moment into the future. And my argument to my skeptics is, my wave has correctly predicted any past moment that you can conceive of. Therefore, there is a certain intellectual obligation to at least take seriously the contention that it predicts the part of history that has not yet undergone the formality of actually occurring, as Whitehead would say. And if under different circumstances, I would demonstrate this wave because it gets down to a very, very finely grained argument about the vicissitudes of history and where the great changes lie. And without that, it's a sort of arm waving at this point.
Terence, I've just got one final question I want to ask you about this, which is that other people who tell us the end is at hand, as in placards, the end is at hand, prepare to meet thy doom,
Right.
suggest that this requires some kind of special moral preparation on our part. Now, does yours come willy-nilly, no need to get ready for it in any particular way? Would you recommend some special kind of preparation?
Well, this is a very difficult question for me because much of what I was involved in many years ago was political activism, political struggle, and yet when I go to my sources on this matter, they assure me that it's a done deal, and that possibly one might spend one's time reassuring other people, but only if you felt like it, or something like that. The walls are now so high, the creode so deep, the momentum so tremendous, that I really don't think anything could swerve or divert us from what we are being drawn into.
I wasn't thinking in terms of more recycling and so on. I was thinking in terms of moral preparation, or conscious preparation.
Well, conscious preparation, I think people should drive out and take a look at the eschaton at the end of the road of history. And what that means is psychedelic self-experimentation. I don't know of any other way to do it. But if you drive out to the end of the road and take a look at the eschaton and kick the tires and so forth, then you will be able to come back here and take your place in this society and be a source of moral support and exemplary behavior for other people. Because I think that as we approach the eschaton, remember I called history its shockwave, literally the Q forces, as engineers call them, the vibrational forces that will rip the wings off an airplane as it approaches hypersonic speed. History is good. That's what I meant when I said it will be a white knuckle ride. There is an outlandish amount of vibration in the next 19 years. It's going to look good, then bad, then worse, then good, then bad. And if you haven't driven out to the end of the road and taken a look at what's waiting, it'll just drive you nuts what the next 20 years are going to be like. Because all the resonances of all past time are now in the close packing phase as the thing is squeezed down and the contradictions are rubbing up against each other. Boundaries are dissolving all around us. The Soviet Union, gone. Yugoslavia, gone. America as a great power, gone. Good taste, gone. Boundaries dissolving all around us. This is going to happen faster and faster and faster. And governments now, all they're doing is managing a spreading wildfire of uncontrolled catastrophes and trying to keep us in the dark about how bad things really are. And so it's good to go out and take a look and reassure yourself that it's there.
And to open it up.
Yes.
Terence, you sound to me like a psychedelic version of Karl Marx.
Well, Marx was the last great millenarian theoretician in Western civilization. That's right.
He was convinced that history was the result of the interplay of conflicting classes, and once that conflict had been removed, history itself would cease. And I hear a similar story, except the players are not the classes in society, but these various forms of global problems that we have. And it could be that it's a kind of test arranged by this attractor down the end of the road there that's leering at us, and saying, let's see if you guys can get yourselves together enough to get around this one and show us that you can reach a higher stage of evolution. If you don't make it, you don't survive. If you do make it, then you go to the next step.
It's an initiation ritual.
A sort of, yes. I shouldn't put in this kind of phraseology.
A series of hurdles to be leaped as we approach the
your
end.
kind of language. It's not the way I would exactly express it, but it's a fun way of talking about it. So it might not be the end. It might just be like entering the Masons or something like that.
Yes, well, it's impossible to say. But you're right, certainly, that all of these factors are coming together. I don't see it as class war. I see it as a kind of universal Manichaean struggle between habit and novelty. And, habit is forever dragging novelty back down to its level. And novelty is forever conniving new ways to escape the control of habit. But the good news is, over vast spans of time, novelty always wins. And what we're simply seeing is novelty crossing a particularly significant milestone in its infinite journey outward towards self-expression.
What about all these people that say we're merely crossing from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age, and the emergence of high-speed electronic communications, etc., is the typical symptom of the Aquarian age, and it's high-speed communication, not astrology, but, and all this turbulence is because we're right at the crossing.
See, I think that as we approach this eschatological object, the number of interpretations of what it is will just proliferate exponentially. I mean, false prophets of all sorts and thousands of variants will arise because everyone can feel it, and yet everyone has a unique perspective on it that then distorts their description of it. I mean, I think that all the messiahs and mystics of human history can be seen in this light. You could almost have a geometric theory of messiahhood and just say, if you were in the big league, the Buddha, Christ, Mohammed, Manai, Mahavira league, then you just caught a very bright reflection from the distant spinning eschaton, and then you embodied it and became a microcosm of that distant macrocosm. And religions are set marching by this means. Well, then the guy parading down at Hyde Park with the sign, the only difference between him and the big leaguers is he got a smaller scintilla of the noetic energy. And so then with each of us, we each have a perspective on the eschaton. And to the degree that we cultivate and fan that flame, we get an insight. Through the filter of our personal circumstance, the infinite interprets itself to us. Something like that.
So we're all little bits of noetic thought.
Fall in. We're all carrying a tiny piece of the whole, and at the end of time, each person will make their contribution. Yes, we're like motes being drawn in to this.
Leaf mulching ants.
In other words, we're all aspects of God.
Yes, although I think God is a contaminated term, but we're all aspects of the transcendental other, and our deployment in three-dimensional space and time is just one aspect of its being, and we are in the process of finding our way to a nodal point of transition into a different dimension of its self-expression. Creativity, complexity, density of connectedness. And one reason I love this notion, you see, is because even the positivists agree that the most densely ramified physical material known in the universe is the human neocortex. So suddenly, no longer are we observers of the cosmic drama. It turns out it was our opera all along. And the universal drama of the production and preservation of complexity is met in us. We represent the most precious distillation of this 4, 5, 6 billion year process of the production and conservation of novelty. It returns us to the centers of the cosmic drama and ennobles the human condition thereby. Well, so now there are new technical salvations being offered. It's a possibility no one knows, well, not some people think they know, but it is assumed possible to perhaps migrate into some kind of dimension of electronic microstorage or something. We're all going to live in a gold ytterbium supercooled cube buried 1,000 feet beneath Copernicus and abandon the Earth to animal life, or, that's not very attractive to me. On the other hand, I've never been downloaded into a chip, so I suppose one shouldn't knock it till they've tried it. But the virtual realities that I have seen have been hideously sterile and cartoon-like. On the other hand, predicting the pace of technological innovation, especially with these new technologies, is very, very tricky. The study of neural networks, parallel arrays, they are pushing out in directions where there could be unexpected breakthroughs in the imaging of human intelligence. Or take the cold fusion thing a couple of years ago. It turned out not to be so, but for a moment, the whole thing hung in the balance there, you see. There could be more of this kind of thing. No one is directing or controlling the creative energies of this species. It's being driven by thousands of micro units called companies, all pursuing agendas they won't discuss with anybody who hasn't signed a non-disclosure agreement. So God knows what they're doing out there, and they're fiddling with life and mind and intelligence and micro dimensions and, you name it. So given the past history of technological development, I certainly wouldn't rule out breakthroughs that could make the timetable of my scenario even seem conservative.
Even less than a miracle could, as a matter of fact, sort of turn it around, push it to a new stage, like cold fusion.
Yes, or, superconducting thinking machines, or any of a number of things. It's the future we're living in. Hollywood creates it, and we have to swallow it until something better comes along, or until we get sick enough of that system to do something about it. The design process of human civilization has been left to Bauhaus brats with their eye on their checkbooks. That has created this international airport style of human coral reef that is absolutely abiotic and toxic. So art, I think here in the final moments of human history, we should push the art pedal to the floor and attempt to pour as much beauty into the human design process as we possibly can. Too long have we wandered from the notion that the good, the true, and the beautiful are somehow inextricably linked. I mean, modernity teaches otherwise, but modernity has failed. Well, a revivified shamanism, which would be the culmination of this program of art that I'm suggesting. Essentially, on one level, shamanism is the art of gaining a familiarity with death. And this is what we must do, I think, because we've become so alienated from it. So part of what I talk about is a neo-archaism, that what we are, by leaving history, we're returning to the values that preceded history, where there was a great
de-emphasis on material culture and a great emphasis on human bonding, feeling, cognition, that sort of thing. We have to re-empower our sense of self. We have accepted our place in a very rigid hierarchy as consumers of images, products, and ideas. And as everything dissolves, responsibility will flow inward to the individual, and we will be more and more held responsible for ourselves, our actions, our presentation. No more can we say, well, I'm white, or I'm American, or it won't work. We're entering into a domain of such freedom that the responsibility will be concomitant. And this is a beautiful thing. This is what all the struggle was about, human unfoldment. This is why all those kings were hung and all those, enemies of the human spirit turned back and defeated. So each individual must die to be reborn to the collectivity. That sounds right. That sounds right. Yes. Somehow the modalities of both must be preserved in a higher union. This is the union of opposites, the coincidentia positorum that Jung and alchemy is all about. Well, I really see, now that we're on to this metaphor, what I've really been saying here this evening is that history is an alchemical process. This novelty that I'm talking about being conserved, we might as well have been talking about the sulfic waters or something. History is the act of calling into existence the perfect tool, which is discovered to be the self itself. In a sense, what history is a process of turning ourselves inside out, so that the soul becomes visibly manifest in three-dimensional space, and the body becomes an object freely commanded in the imagination. The patristic father Justinian taught that the resurrection body would be spherical, just to the joy of heathen controversialists, I might add, because it made him so open to attack. But it's an incredibly modern anticipation of ourselves going into a kind of quasi-union with our technology. What is it Yeats says in Sailing to Byzantium, the part about how I would be a thing of gold, and once out of nature I would be a thing of gold enameling, set upon a branch to sing of what has been and what will be. That is the idea that we change ourselves into an eternal, golden, superconducting, perfected object that transcends death, transcends space and time, and has no apparent connection to our physical image as animals. It's the alchemical sublimation. All alchemical processes are like fractal anticipations of this final rendering of the stone itself. No, it is the alchemical idea is not that one goes against nature, but that one aids nature and catalyzes it, and it's very explicit in alchemical thinking, but what one does is one makes it happen faster. One accelerates, catalyzes natural processes, and so this is what we would be doing. We would essentially be by transforming ourselves in this way, we bring ever closer the final apokatasis. No, one has stepped from the mortal coil. Yes. Plato said, time is the moving image of eternity, and so eternity is outside the wheel.
And that is what I mean by this higher dimension of completedness. It is eternity, and all time rests within it. Well, if it happens in the individual, then it's a property of the species. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny and vice versa. There are only these fractal adumbrations of the transformative process on every level. Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah. Well, we're past time, I see. Thank you for your indulgence, and thank you again for your indulgence.